Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Conf was a conference that I saw was at the perfect intersection of two things that I'm extremely passionate about. And if you think about the web and the importance of the web in today's mediums, across our mobile devices, across our computers, it's really two different disciplines smashing together like a supernova. And when I saw Conf, I was like, this is a perfect opportunity for me to talk about something that I've spent the past 3.5 to close to 4 years building. And I'm really excited to share, hopefully, a little bit of my vision with you guys so that you guys can hopefully be inspired to build the future of the web. So I want to start out with this concept that I've always struggled with the first time I developed a website. I was 13 years old. I was opening Dreamweaver, and I was building a website for my friends, hosting it on GeoCities. How many people built a website on GeoCities? Yes, love you guys.
Dinosaurs.
Exactly. And even though I was 13, I thought that code was pretty difficult to approach. And then even after I went to computer science school, got my bachelor's in computer engineering, I still thought coding was a discipline that required a lot of training. You had to think a lot about a lot of different things. For example, back when I was in school, things like object-oriented programming was a hotness. And now it's like functional. Now it's like Smalltalk and Haskell has these like massive revivals, and object-oriented programming is no longer cool anymore. So now, like, code is actually this massive, massive thing that people have to learn, and only 0.25% of the world's population can actually understand and write code. Not only that, the web is really messy. And I came from working on embedded chips and storage devices, and I thought that was pretty gnarly stuff. But whenever I would build a website for a friend, I would try and figure out CSS. I would try and figure out HTML, and I would just be like, there's gotta be a better way for me to build a website. Not only that, you have all these other tools out there. You have SAS, you have Gulp, you have Webpack, you have NPM, and you're trying to explain these things to someone that's new to the web, and they're trying to wrap their head around it, and they're just like, what are you talking about? I'm gulping? What is gulp? On top of that, you have this problem of designing for all these devices, right? So responsive web design was this thing that came out and it was like super hot in 2009, 2010. But since then, we've only had thousands of more devices to design for. You have iPad Pros now with the same DPI resolution as MacBook Pros, and you have all these small feature phones that you also have to think about. So like, it's just this ever-expanding complexity, and what we end up with as designers are cookie-cutter websites, because they're really difficult to put together, and that's the easiest thing for most people to build. So what ends up happening is that most websites look the same, which to me is a huge pity, because when I was playing around with GeoCities, I was like, I can have marquee, I can have like these crazy GIFs, but what I see now on the web are really standard things. On top of that, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with React, but now like this massive front-end developer community are building things on abstraction layers over the code of HTML and CSS. So now like developers have to think of components. Now they have to think of how to use JSX. So all these things are even more things that new people to the web have to learn. But before I continue, I just want to touch very briefly on the computing history and how humans have told computers how to do stuff. So if, I can't see anyone, but like if you were born in 1980, and if you were to take all of the processing power that was available on the planet, if you were to add up all the transistors, that would be the equivalent of 3 iPhone 7s. In terms of transistors and computing power operations per second, this is a computer literally from 1980 that could do barely the number of operations that a computer in 1997 could make. So what we did as engineers and as humans is that we started building abstraction layers, right? So instead of punch cards to massive mainframes, we started thinking about how we can build on top of things like machine code. So this is x86, and you simply had instruction sets to essentially abstract, be the level above zeros and ones. What did that give us? So that gave us the ability to write compilers. And compilers are essentially programs that build programs. And that's a crazy thing to think about, actually, but that enabled things like C. And that level of abstraction led to modern programs and computer programs that you see today. But the thing is that we as web designers and web developers, we don't have that connection to the medium anymore. And I just want to touch another brief segue into how other artists and other creatives create for the medium. So take a painter, for example. A painter sits in front of a stool, has a brush in his hand, and has a canvas that's directly in front of him. Every brush stroke, every fiber of that brush is captured directly on the medium that he is creating for. Every musician, every fret, every stroke translates directly to an amplifier that produces sound. That is a direct connection to the medium. Writers with typewriters. Sculptures have clay objects that they can actually manipulate directly in front of them. Illustrators with drawing pens and pencils, and carpenters with wood. And the thing with all of these disciplines is that we've managed to create an abstraction layer over these disciplines to allow us to create these things digitally. And we've used the benefit of computers to build, well, before I get there, take for example, musicians, right? So we've created sheet music, treble, clef, quarter notes, bars, measures. So we've taken the concept of that fret and that strum and translated it directly into something that we could give to someone else and educate. We created programs like InDesign. We're able to take images and lay it out with text so that we can take it directly to a printer. And we've created things like 3D modeling software. This is back in 1992, and we had 3D modeling software on computers that enabled people to, instead of write polygons on code, they can actually create 3D models visually. And then we have bloggers. These are people, this was a technology that enabled anyone that had a voice be able to put it on the web. And this is really, the reason why I'm talking about these things is because I want to show you really quickly how other creative disciplines have managed to create these abstractions. So 3D animators, 3D modelers, cinematic grading artists, if you didn't know what that was, digital artists with Photoshop, illustrators with Adobe Illustrator, game level designers in Unity 3D and all these other tools. Music production. So I produce some electronic music on the side, Logic Pro X, coolest thing ever. Particle effects, photographers, print designers, texture artists, video editing, visual effects artists, and this is web design. This is just something that I could not understand. I was just thinking, just like, I literally have to write CSS, I literally have to write HTML, and I have to load a browser window. And I have to see exactly how that code translates visually. And then, of course, I make a mistake. Of course, I use the wrong color. Of course, I forget to close a tag. And the medium becomes an obstacle. And that's not something that I just see as us telling our kids how to build websites 10 years from now. Why is this the case? So the web is extremely different than all the other mediums I mentioned before. It's very difficult to create. But if you take the analogy of music, and you take a virtuoso guitarist like Slash, he practiced more than 10,000 hours in his lifetime, maybe a little theory, I don't know, I put that in there so the graph looked prettier. But he is able to translate something directly in his mind, which is, I don't know, like the riff to November Rain, and he was able to take that riff and play it, record it, and blow the minds of millions of people, right? But the web is so different. If you think about it, the web is made up of so many disciplines. You have developers, you have designers, you have content strategists, you have UX experts, visual designers, and you have all these disciplines together, and you're trying to create for the same medium. What other creative discipline has that? What other creative discipline has all these different roles, and they're all striving for the same objective, which is, in this case, a simple website or a responsive website? And we've coined this term. We've coined a term for someone that can design and develop. And if you happen to be one of these people and look like that, please come find me. I'll need to give you a sticker or something, or I need to meet you. And this also detracts from the huge part of design and entrepreneurship that is just as important. So thinking about where to spend, thinking about where to spend our precious brain cycles, and thinking about other ways that we can apply them. And the web is extremely tedious to create for. So we write HTML, we write CSS, maybe some JavaScript, right? And somehow we get a fancy website, sure. To the average business owner that, down the street, you're probably thinking, yeah, that sounds about right in terms of how to get a website up and running. How much do you want for the website? I usually charge $3,000 for a website. And they're like, what? Isn't it just like some code and you just throw it together? But in fact, it's an insane process. It's this iterative process where you're writing code. You're checking it on the browser. You write some more code. You make some refinements. You make sure it works on all these different media queries. You make sure it works on all these different browsers. That process is incredibly tedious. Imagine if Slash had some guy that he had to tell, or some sort of instrument for every single fret note and for every single stroke. Would he be able to create November Rain in the same way? This also takes away from, in my opinion, the designer's main responsibilities. The main responsibility of a designer, in terms of the order of hierarchies for a designer, this is from Julie Zhou from Facebook, is my product makes money, which allows me to make more useful products. How many designers have the luxury of getting to that pinnacle of design? I think that's something that is related to the difficulty of creating for the web. Good design is really difficult. It takes time. You have to blend all these different factors. You have to blend user experience. You have to blend user research. And you have to compile it all into a deliverable that your client will pay for, that customers will come to you for. But the thing is that coding is also hard. So then you have two of these disciplines that could not be further apart from each other, and they're meant to create for the same exact medium. So what happens? So you have this. You have your designer down at the bottom of the treehouse, and they're pining for these changes for your developer to make. And you're just like, no, please make this button less round. And the developer's like, oh, yeah, I know, but I'm gulping. I want to introduce you to someone. This is my friend, Andrew Wilkinson. Andrew Wilkinson started a company. It's called MetaLab. And MetaLab has created a lot of cool products, some of them which you might have heard of. So he created Slack. He's a pretty prolific product designer. And I was talking to him late last year, and he was just like, I just don't understand why, in this day and age, I need to file a Jira ticket to change something on my website. He was like, okay, well, why do you have to do that? Well, like, we have processes now. I have to go to the project manager to get resources to fix something on the website. I was like, well, aren't you a designer? And aren't you the CEO? Can't you just go change it, fool? No. It's literally something that I've coined the telegram game. Whenever you want to change on your website, it's like writing a telegram and getting it sent. So here on the right, you can imagine it's Andrew that's talking to the project manager, which is in the middle. Then you have the developer or designer sitting at the telegram, literally punching it in, right? There's so many different layers of separation now, and there's so many different ways to get something done. But the problem is, because of all the roles of creating in the web, the design, the developer, it creates a lot of obstacles. The web is very different, right? And the web is the first super medium that we've ever created before. What is a super medium? Well, if we think of illustration, it's visual. If you think of November Rain's guitar riff, it's audio. If you think of a print magazine, visual. But the web is that and more. The web is the first medium where, instead of just like throwing over the fence, we have to worry about where this website is going to live, how it's going to be hosted, where the database is, how are we going to accelerate the content. We have things like animations and interactions on the web. This responds to user input. There's no other medium where there's a two-way dialogue between what happens from what the screen shows and what the user is doing. There's dynamic data on the web. The web is powered by data. Billion-dollar companies are using the web, and they're built on top of data. Airbnb would not exist if it only had a static website. The web is also responsive. It's fluid. Layouts are supposed to be adapted for all different mediums, from my phone to large TV screens. There's no other medium that also adapts, and you have to think about all these different infinite number of options. The web is also instant. The days of like loading Microsoft Excel onto your computer and then like installing it, those days are gone. Now you can go to Google Sheets and you get powerful spreadsheet software instantaneously. But there's 4 huge problems that I've personally identified with creating for the super medium. First of all, there's this massive gap, right? So with the code that I'm writing and what the end result is, right? I have to make all these context switches. I have to switch back between my Sublime text, and I have to open the browser and see what those changes look like. There's all these crazy web technologies that are coming out left and right. Like, I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I'm mostly a generalist engineer. Like, whenever I have to build something on the web, I just like, oh God, like this sucks, right? I have to learn flexbox. Oh man, I have to learn flexbox because I can't center something horizontally and vertically. Oh, I have to learn flexbox so I could get this dashboard layout to look exactly right. And not only that, there's so many other technologies that are coming out in the near future, like CSS grids, that are completely going to change the way layout is done on the web. The other thing is that the web is also not static, right? This is a website that I thought it was super funny. It's like, do you buy a girl a drink.com? I just thought it was hilarious. And you can literally click through this and pull it out on your mobile phone when you're at a bar, and you can instantaneously know when to buy a girl a drink. What website or what app or what medium gives you this ability? And like I said earlier, the web is powered by data, right? There's billions and billions of gigabytes of data out there, and they're all meant to be presented to users, hopefully, in a good way, unless you're Edward Snowden or something. And there are 4 steps that I believe should exist to harness the power of these 4 principles of the supermedium. Okay, so this is the first Webflow related screenshot, right? So it's like pretty far down, but I wanted to use this screenshot to tell a story of having a tool that has a direct connection to the medium. And I'll get into this a little bit later. Second is that we need tooling that simplifies and consolidates the new technology that is coming out on the web. The thing is that the web is evolving constantly. W3C is constantly coming out with new specs. For us to keep up, for us to think about the browser variations, like it's just very cumbersome to do. This is an example of all the flex properties that have been consolidated into a Webflow UI. And you can see that we've taken different properties like space end around, align left, align center, different flex children properties, and we've boiled it down into an interface that gives you instant feedback on the medium. This is another example, responsive images. It's not just enough for your website to be responsive, but you also have to think about the assets being responsive as well. So thinking about, gosh, I can't even imagine like how long it would take me to take a source image and then do all the different variations of that image for all the different breakpoints. It's very tedious. And this is, in my opinion, something that we rely on tools for. In Logic Pro X, do I have to control every single fade in and fade out, pitch, tone, and I have to also control all the different layers of my soundtracks? No, Logic Pro X does all of that for me, and I'm able to arrange it all beautifully. To address non-static, there's animations and interaction tools that we need on the web. It's, in my opinion, a pity that the web has all of these powerful layouts and animation tools, but there's no solid tooling around them. Oh, sorry, there's a lot of animation technology, but there's no solid tooling around them. And then, again, on the data perspective, giving designers the ability to design with the data that their developers are bringing to the surface. So these are the 4 general principles of the supermedium that form the foundation of what we're trying to do. So, without further ado, I want to show you guys a few things that encapsulate these 4 principles of the supermedium that I discussed. But before I get there, how many people have tried Webflow before? Wow. Dang, that's a lot. Okay. Maybe I'm going to have to change up my demo to make it a little more novel, but that's really awesome. So for those people that have tried it, hopefully you guys see something new. For those people that haven't, hopefully you guys get an understanding into what I'm seeing this tool for the supermedium doing. Okay, so number 1, abstraction over the medium. So on the left, you see all of our elements. These are HTML elements. These are components. These are different things that you can drag and drop. Oh man, I use the term drag and drop. That you can bring into the canvas of the Webflow tool. And I'm going to say why I cringed very shortly. On the left, or on the right, you have our style panel. And as you see, it's pretty complicated. There's a lot of stuff there. As you see, there's things like drag handles, there's unit boxes, and these are things that are abstraction layers over the CSS properties that you're manipulating underneath the hood. So Webflow is not a drag and drop website builder. You can think of Webflow as an abstraction layer over the medium of the foundational web technologies that already exist in the browser. Things like the box model. So let me show you really quickly what that looks like. So those of you that already code, you guys are very familiar with the box model. You guys are familiar with margin, padding, and the way elements lay out to each other. The reason why Webflow is not a drag and drop tool is because when I click this header element, you see the DOM acting on my behalf, and you see it working in the navigator on the right. So you're working inside of the box model as opposed to doing some sort of magic to help you lay it out. And this is very important for another reason that I'll get to shortly. So as you see here, I'm sure you guys can kind of guess what the blue and the red is. Does that show up for you guys? So blue is margin, green is padding, and you can kind of just see like how this layout was built. And you can see the box model helping you. So Webflow is also responsive. So we have 4 different media queries for you to work with. You have tablet, you have phone landscape, phone portrait. And the reason why we force you to design inside the constraints of the box model is because remember, this medium is adaptive. It is of infinite variety. So you need the browser's logic to help you lay out a website. Otherwise, you're going to tweak your website ad infinitum and never end up with something that looks perfect on every single device. So this brief overview of the abstraction. So I wanted to kind of skip ahead to the last one, which is the data. So for those that have used Webflow but have not tried our CMS, our CMS is what we call the first visual CMS. And it gives you, the designer, the ability to think about the structure of your website's content. And you're able to create new fields. You can choose the data types for those fields. And you're able to structure relationships between your data. Not just blog posts to blog comments, but you can have something like a job listing and jobs. So this exposes all of the power that developers are used to in things like Ruby on Rails and Django, on top of their databases like Postgres, MySQL. And it brings it visually so that the designer can start designing with that data. I'm going to show you a quick example of that. So here, this website is a company, for a company called sandwichvideo. They make very popular videos for a lot of startups in the Valley and in the US. You might recognize this bearded guy's face. He kind of looks Portuguese, maybe. But and this is a perfect example of a website that's powered by data. Sure, there's no user-generated content on here, but there's a lot of data, like 60, 70 videos, and it's structured content. So what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to design a new list layout here, and I'm going to show you how a designer can bind data elements to the canvas. So I'm going to drag a section right here. And inside the section, I'm going to drag this very unique element called a dynamic list. So this dynamic list has magical properties. So you can say that the contents of this list come from a set of my collections. And you can see my collections being defined right here. Right? So I have companies, events, partners, people. And I'm going to say the contents of this list comes from my projects. And then boom, boom, boom. I can see that it's kind of giving me an idea of how that content is going to look. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to drag in an image because I want to get the thumbnail video showing up first. So I just dragged in an image. And I'm going to say, I'm going to get the source of this image from the project's video thumbnail field. Okay, cool. So now I've got all these images. It doesn't look very good. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to make it a little bit more powerful and look a little bit better. So I'm going to use a flexbox layout because that's the new hotness, and that's the way people should do some of this. And I'm just going to call this flexbox grid. Can't type today. And what I'm doing is I just gave that element, which is my dynamic list wrapper, I just gave that element a class. So what's going to happen now when I change the display setting for that element, and if I click Flexbox, oh gosh, what happened? Well, it's because all of the children in that Flexbox list got stuck in that container. So what I have to do is I have to click this thing called wrap children, which is this Flexbox property. So now that looks a little bit better. What I can do now is style the individual grids. So I'm going to call this project. And I'm going to give it a width of 25%. Boom. So as you can see, because this element is essentially a template node, it applied that class to all of its siblings, so everything inside, right next to it. So now I can do stuff with that template node. I can give it margin, I can give it padding, blah, 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 blah. But I'm going to keep it nice and tight. And I'm actually going to change it to a 3-column. So now, what I want to do is I want to make these thumbnails clickable, because thumbnail images are clickable. And I'm going to drag a link block inside of that template node. And I'm going to tell the canvas that everything inside that link block should go to my current project detail page. And I'll explain what a detail page is. So I'm going to drag this image into that link block to make it clickable. And now, when I go into preview mode, you'll see that cursor, and when I click it, I'll be switched to the detail page. And I'm going to go back to the home page. So far, this is a example of the abstraction of the medium. What I want to do really quickly is I want to just create the name of the video over the video. The name of the video over the video's thumbnail image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this link block to give it a CSS class. And I'm going to tell it to position relatively so that all of its children are affected by it. And I'm going to drag a header into here. And I'm going to say, get this text from the name. And that is really ugly, but we're going to fix that. So I'm going to give this a class. So I'm going to call this the project name. And I'm just going to make it a little bit prettier. And I'm also going to position it into the thumbnail. And to do that, I'm going to absolute position it relative to the parent. Where did it go? Can anyone guess where my H4 went when I clicked absolute position? Yep. So So it was actually hidden by the Z index. So when you position stuff relatively, you have to think about the layers of the medium now. It's like, oh gosh, another thing. So what I'm going to do just to make this a little bit pop is I'm going to give it an overlay. And I'm going to make it a little bit more white, stand out better. And then I'm also going to position it in the top right corner. And then I'm going to change the position so it's not as flush. And I'm going to bring it out a little bit more. Okay. It's still too bright. I'm going to make this a lot. There we go. I'm going to give it a little bit more padding so it stands out a little bit better. So now I've got the names of my video appearing over the thumbnail. So now I think it's a pretty good time to make this grid come alive. So what I'm going to show you is how we can add what we call an interaction to this element. So maybe we can have this element fade in and fade out as you're scrolling. So what I can do is I can add an interaction. I'm going to call it a scroll effect. And I'm going to say that the initial appearance of this element will be 50%. But I can set a trigger for what happens. So as you can see here, I can set load triggers, I can set scroll triggers, click triggers, hover triggers, and a bunch of other triggers that are related to the components. So in this case, I'm going to select a scroll trigger. And then I'm going to say, when this element scrolls into view, bring up the opacity to 100%. And when this element scrolls out of view, I'm going to bring this element's opacity back to 0. And then, hopefully, you can kind of see that subtle effect. But given that the initial appearance doesn't look, 50% might be too high, I'm just going to change that to 10. Give you a better idea as I scroll. Actually, just because I'm a perfectionist, I'm going to change it. This is what happens when you have so much power. So that the offset works. So the offset means what part of the view, of the viewport, should this scroll interaction trigger. I'm going to say 25% of the viewport. So that now, I only see a maximum of like 3 or 4 images speed up. So I'm just going to quickly publish this and see what it looks like on my desktop. So scroll up here. As I'm scrolling, I have that interaction firing. Let's see if the link works. Yep, link works. And what I've done is taken a lot of CSS, taken a lot of HTML, and in the interaction stuff, taken a lot of jQuery and made it a lot more accessible for me to implement visually. So, back to this. I just want to quickly touch on a few different things that Webflow is working on that's going to give you even more power. So, a couple weeks ago, we launched something called Interactions 2.0. So it's going to build on the features that you saw earlier, but it will give you even more inputs and customizability into how to design your interaction. So you can add some parallax with essentially a scroll signal. So you can change how elements lay out depending on your scroll position. This is an example of using the mouse position to also affect the way elements behave. And then last but not least, you can also build what we call a timeline interaction, where you can start to have some of the features that you have in other animation tools. For those of you that are familiar with like Flex back in the day, being able to build animations there. So if you're a developer, you're probably wondering, all right, where do I fit in, right? Like, this is cool, but I already know how to do all this. So we have two different things that we're coming out with very soon. One of them is the CMS API, which will give you the ability to add all of your data into Webflow, as well as be notified through webhooks when things change. But the other thing that I'm actually super, super excited about is actually opening up the Webflow design platform to developers. So that now developers that build a really awesome component, let's just say a really awesome slider with amazing effects, you'd be able to build that component and then be able, and then to enable your designers or other designers even to design with that component inside of Webflow. These are some big architectural things that we're changing underneath to empower you to do that. Developers, wake up. I want to touch very briefly on one other thing. You're probably thinking, okay, this is really cool for me to build a website without code, but 99% of websites out there already exist, right? They already have massive stores of data. You're probably powering it with Ruby on Rails, Postgres, Flask, Django, Node Express, whatever, name your favorite framework. And you're thinking, how do I use Webflow and its powerful design capabilities with my existing data? I want to just ask, survey people real quick. Who here has heard of GraphQL? The enlightened few. I am personally extremely excited about this technology. And for those that don't know what it is, man, this is as non-technical as I can get, but it essentially is a uniform query language that enables your applications to have very rich querying ability and very rich mutation ability, so that you're no longer building applications with API endpoints that are very granular. So I can essentially say, when I'm creating my front-end view, that I want to construct a query, and I want to get the user object, and I want the name, I want the profile picture, and some other stuff, and I want that data from a server, and I want to use it on my client, in my view. So this is an example with Facebook, right? So Facebook created GraphQL. And yes, I do have two mutual friends, actually. And this is a huge shift in the way developers are retrieving content for their websites. Here at Webflow, we are super excited about this, because now what that means is that you guys as developers, all you guys have to do is expose a GraphQL endpoint so that Webflow can talk to it. So that now, instead of choosing data that you're binding into your views, you can choose essentially something that comes from your own database, and enable your designers to build all sorts of content with your existing data. So I just want to wrap up quickly by saying that it's really easy for us to be sitting here and thinking that this is the way the web is going to operate in the foreseeable future. But I think what drives me as an entrepreneur and technologist is thinking about the evolution of technology and thinking about exactly how technology can empower the next generation of creators. So that maybe one day we have a future slash for the web that can literally translate something in their brain into a live website. And it's not called the grid. So this is one of my favorite quotes. This is from Grace Hopper. It's the most damaging phrase in the language is, "We've always done it this way." And I've always thought that this is something that all of us that work in technology should think about. Always thinking about how we can create the next best thing, how we can always make something better. So that at the very end, we can empower even more people to build for the web, not write code or be stuck in CSS. Thank you.